in Gwyn Morgan, former Encana CEO, on that front. And I want to start there. As you take a look through that document, is there enough in there for the West to feel that they're being represented?
Well, good afternoon from the West, as they say. When I look at what was said in the update, the good news for the oil and gas industry is there was no news. We're getting so inured to always having bad news handed to us whenever the Trudeau government does anything. We always are happy that we're not mentioned. And that's a poor state of affairs, but it's the reality.
Okay, so in terms of like no news is good news on that front, there was a little bit in terms of obviously the pain that Alberta is going through right now economically, because obviously the entire country is living through the pain of COVID and the closures, and Alberta is more acutely feeling the pain, of course, in the pressure in international oil prices. There was some talk about fiscal stabilization, that program there, being a little more reactive, perhaps a little more generous. Is that going to be in Alberta's best interest in the little next while going forward?
I don't think that Albertans have been looking for any kind of handout or support for oil prices. What they've really looked for is a positive attitude on the part of the government that this is an industry they want to have continue. And that is now becoming evident that they figured that out.
In terms of some of the big infrastructure projects that have been a concern to the energy sector and to Canadians who follow the sector, Keystone XL, there is some optimism that perhaps there could be a way, even though we know Joe Biden's stance on that project longer term, that it could still find a way forward under a Biden presidency. And Ottawa has, put in a good word, I guess you could say. Does any of that make you a little more optimistic on that project getting through?
Well, we're seeing a trend here, really, a reversal, a necessary reversal on the part of the government, the Trudeau government, because they understand that they've already dug such a huge fiscal hole, as we all know, the worst in the G20, that they have to look for a way out. And the number one source of revenue for the governments of Canada, in this municipal, federal, and provincial, and also export revenue, is by far and away the oil and gas sector. So let's start there, because that's the reality, and that's something that they seem to be realizing. It started off a while ago when Seamus O'Regan, the energy minister, said that the oil sands praised the oil sands, saying that it was remarkable, the technology and the ingenuity to tap that resource. And that was almost a complete it was something that everybody in the industry was amazed to hear. And then, of course, as you just said, one of the first things on Trudeau's list in his discussion with President-elect Biden was Keystone XL. So this is, if you look at the undertone here, as I said earlier, the oil and gas industry wasn't mentioned in the budget, but the undertone is that the Liberals have figured out that this fiscal hole can only be if they don't get their best and most productive and most revenue-generating and job-creating industry going, they're going to be in even deeper trouble. So it's an interesting reversal. I don't think it has to do with the ideology of, they used to have I don't think it maybe changed their overall background faux ideology of phasing out the sector, but we're sort of seeing a turnaround. I think that's good news and necessary news.
And it is so interesting and amazing to hear this reversal. And that, I think, as you said, you said moments ago that they figured it out, and it seems though they've perhaps figured it out in, as I think you said, a little bit of desperation. So can you give us perhaps your thoughts on that, and also how key and critical the Canadian energy industry is to our overall economy? It's been forgotten about in terms of the contribution for so many years now, until we have become in a pandemic.
Well, I'll start, with regard to the Canadian dollar, which is going to be under a lot more pressure as the reality of this debt builds up. The oil and gas exports add up to more than the other top 8 net exports for the country. I say net because the auto industry, for example, we have a lot of we export a lot, but we import more in terms of the auto sector. But the oil and gas industry is the one that actually has the most net exports by far. There's about 1 million jobs in Canada created, and one of the things that people across out of Alberta and the West don't realize is the huge effect it has on Ontario and even Quebec. Most actually of the hard material, pipe and other products, electronic products, every other kind of stuff that is invested in capital programs in the oil and gas industry comes from central Canada. That's something that isn't realized. And then of course the whole refining sector and so on. It adds up to about 1 million jobs across the country.
So quite astounding. And I think that as well, when we think though about the liberal ideology right now, that perhaps they're reversing a little bit, or at least there's no mention per se in terms of the oil and gas industry in the fiscal update. But, give us your sense, your knowledge of the reality of really replacing fossil fuels for wind and solar, because I think so many people believe that that can be done. So why aren't we doing it today? You say what to that?
Well, some people saw my National Post column a few weeks ago where I went through the whole fallacy and the myth about green power, wind and solar particularly. Because, and I've always been perplexed, or even, I guess perplexed is the word, about how people could actually believe that. I mean, think about wind, the wind only blows part of the time, and you can't store the energy. And so what do you do when it isn't blowing? And besides that, it doesn't create much energy anyway, and it's very high cost. Think about solar. If you look at our Canadians in the wintertime when we need most energy, how much are we going to generate from having solar panels? So this is so simple. I'm an engineer and I look into all the details and all this, and I understand all the ins and outs of the cost and everything else associated with the technology. But it doesn't take rocket science. So it's a myth that it can do any good. Right now, after tens and billions of dollars being spent in Ontario, mainly by the ratepayers, and other green power, wind and solar across the country, it now produces 2.3% of our power. And across the world, there's been hundreds of billions spent. Germany is the poster boy for that. And even after all of that and all the decades of that, the net contribution to global energy supply is 2%. At a very high cost. So that's the bottom line. And so we have to find other ways. And one of the things I just published, had a National Post column published to say it today, that says one of the things we can do more than anything else as Canadians to help the reduce global emissions, and at the same time create hundreds, thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in revenue, is to export our natural gas. And we've only got one LNG project going after 10 years because of this arduous and Byzantine process we have here in Canada for getting anything done. But we could have many more. But just that one project off the west coast of British Columbia, or LNG Canada, it will produce enough natural gas when it's destined to China and replaces coal, to replace about 80 to 90%, equivalent of replacing 80 to 90% of the cars on Canadian roads. So here we are with this huge surplus, this huge ability, and we have managed to sort of only get one project done in 10 years when there's 20 others that just gave up.
Always great to get your insights, and always love it when you take the time to join us. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Gwyneth Morgan is the former CEO of Encana.